Hi, everybody. This is Chris Joseph, along with Dr. Amy Neff.
Hey Chris, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Amy?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful day.
It is a beautiful day. You're in Nashville, or
Yep.
I am in New Orleans, so we're both in the South. Let's tell our audience who we are again, real quickly. You want to go
Yep.
first?
Sure, I'll go first. Okay, so I'm Amy Neff. I'm a family practice doctor trained in integrative medicine. I did a fellowship in outpatient psychiatry, a fellowship in psychedelic medicine, and have recently finished up the Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health's integrative oncology training. How about you, Chris? Tell me about yourself.
I am an 8-year plus survivor of third stage pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October 2016. And I was certified as a trained advocate by the Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health. And recently, just a few days ago, also certified as a radical remission teacher.
I saw
And
that.
yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
neat. So some of what I've learned is the school of hard knocks through my own journey, and
Mhm.
then learning much more detail about how to coach, how to be an advocate
Yes.
through the two certificates I have.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit about the differences between the radical remission and the metabolic terrain, if you could. Just a few sentences.
Um, I think the Metabolic Terrain Institute of Health, MTIH, does a much deeper dive into the biology, into the actual
Mm,
terrain. Terrain meaning someone's body, mind, soul. Um, it gets into the nitty gritty, which is really, really good about um, not only the physical aspects, what people are eating, what they're not eating, how much they're exercising, how much they're not, um, their mental, emotional makeup, their exposure to toxins,
mhm.
their stress levels, how are they sleeping, what kind of water are they drinking, are they drinking enough water, are they dealing with trauma? I mean, so there's a lot of components um, under that approach that need to be examined and tested. Radical remission, there is some overlap. Radical
Mhm.
remission is 10 factors, and don't ask me to recite all 10 of them right now. Um, 10 factors that Dr. Kelly Turner determined were essential in people healing from cancer.
Mhm.
So there is some overlap. Mental, emotional is one of them. What you're eating,
Yeah.
supplements. But the radical remission side doesn't really do much testing. They rely on the metabolic approach for that. So they're
Yes.
complementary, actually,
Right. I love
I
that.
think. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, I think, to me, one of the things that seems to be shared in both of these models or approaches is that sense of autonomy, right? That sense of agency. Um, yeah.
No
So,
question about it. No question about it. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the factors in radical remission is empowering yourself.
yeah,
It is critically important
right.
for patients to know that and to learn that and to
Yeah.
practice it.
Right. So, that seems like a really good kind of thing for us to depart into a little bit more deeply today is that sense of empowerment um, and agency and getting maybe a little bit more granular about some practical aspects of empowerment, especially when you interact with the healthcare team. Yeah.
Yeah, no, let's dive into that. I told you before we hit recording that in my first book, Life is a Ride, I wrote about the patient's Bill of Rights, something I came up with that I learned the hard way, things I wasn't doing when I first got diagnosed with cancer, but things that I think are essential for healing and not just surviving, but
This book,
thriving.
Chris? This
That is the
book.
book. That is the
Yeah.
book. Yes.
Okay. So, first of all, Chris, man, you wrote a book called
Uh,
Life is a Ride, and it's available on Amazon for a very reasonable price. So for anybody that's watching, if you want to get a copy of this, this is available. Um, yeah, so in that you outlined some steps, right?
I did. I'm writing a second book, which is going to elaborate more on these steps. But yeah, the first one, if you want me to dive right in,
Please
is
do.
Patient's Bill of Rights. Number one, you have the right to bring someone, a friend or a loved one, with you to a doctor's visit.
Mm,
Friend or a loved one will hear things you won't. They will ask questions that you either don't know to ask or are too scared to ask.
hmm.
And it's also good for them to just help with any note taking.
Yeah.
And it's good for someone to be with you just for emotional support, to
Yeah.
hold your hand.
Right. So, I told you I'm writing a book chapter about depression in cancer care right now. And one of the things that I've learned is that dissociation is normal in the experience of having cancer. So, what does that functionally mean? What is dissociation? Well, very practically, it can mean that if you're in the exam room and a clinician says something that's triggering to you, you're going to freeze. You're not choosing this, but your body mind is going to stop and you're not going to remember or even hear what is being said. So let's say, Chris, you know, would love to have someone with you, but don't. Um, would a reasonable strategy be to record what's being said?
Absolutely. Yes. I think it's a great idea to
Yeah.
record the conversation. It's a way for you to go back after the
Hmm.
appointment. Because I guarantee you, and I went through this when I heard the news, you got a tumor in your pancreas. I didn't really hear anything after that.
Hmm.
I mean, it was almost like the radiologist, his mouth was moving,
Yeah.
but I went right into fight or flight
Yes.
immediately.
Right.
And most people would.
Hmm.
But when you're in fight or flight, you're not going to be listening all that well. And I didn't listen all that well.
Right.
So yes, I love the idea of some sort of, even with your iPhone, just recording the conversation. Love
Yeah.
that.
Right. So, yeah, pretty much all phones are now just pocket recording devices. And so you have the ability to go back, and I can say in healthcare, I think it's less and less common nowadays, but there are still maybe clinicians that are afraid of being recorded, right? And I'll say from a clinician standpoint, they don't want to be like have be susceptible to some game of gotcha, right? And so I think that that kind of like implicit within that recording space is an idea of trust, right? But on the other hand, you as the patient, you're receiving information from them. If you can't trust the information, if they're afraid that what they're telling you is going to make them medical legally liable, you know I think that because they hold the up power in this relationship, they have to be willing, to take responsibility for that, right?
I would say it's probably a red flag if a doctor says no to recording.
Yes. Yes. At this point, I think you're right. In fact, whether patients know it or not, very often we're now using AI scribes, in the exam room to like listen to everything that's getting said because like I typically consent patients for that, but when I'm talking with someone and I'm not typing fast enough. And although I type very well, I do like to focus on the patient. If I have a tool that can record what we're saying and kind of digest it, finally useful technology. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to my college days when I was taking notes. We all take notes in college classes,
Hmm.
and the professor would say something, I'd be writing it, and while I was writing, he'd be saying some other point, and I would miss it because I
Yep.
was too busy writing.
Right.
And so yeah, the recording is really a valuable thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what's next on your list, Chris?
Number two, assuming your condition isn't immediately life-threatening, you have the right to obtain a second opinion and
Mm.
maybe a third or fourth opinion.
Hmm.
You have the right to hear differing opinions, assuming there are some, and to consult with people who have gone the non-traditional route and with doctors and health practitioners who practice alternatively.
Mm.
In other
Yeah.
words, there are things beyond Western medicine.
Right. Yes. So, I want to put a kind of like a sciency spin on that. Again, this is just like ripped from the headlines of the literature about the nervous system involvement in cancer. So, going back to that concept of agency, when you don't have a sense of agency and there's a lot of fear, well, fear is a feeling that you experience in the body. And kind of concomitant with that feeling are neurochemical actions and events, right? And so we know that cell signaling in cancer, in fact, cancer initiation and progression is intimately linked up with the nervous system. And in radical remission and with the Metabolic Terrain Institute that we focus a lot on how you're feeling, right? About taking care of your unfinished business, and healing old wounds that seemingly are totally unassociated with cancer, but in fact have everything to do with cancer. And it's not like that it's your fault. It has nothing, it's not like that. It's that you've had experiences that have, basically through all of those 14 or 15 now hallmarks of cancer have led to the development of some cells that are no longer behaving by the rules. And to me, it's of course very empowering to think that things that make you feel better from a kind of a healing perspective actually have this tremendous impact on tumor progression.
Absolutely.
Yes, right. And so I think that from a patient kind of experience. And I'm baking it in, to the language that I use with patients around that sense of agency, right? Because in fact, it is that sense of agency that is therapeutic. Yeah.
I can't remember if we discussed this on the last episode, but as you know, upwards of about 90% of cancers are not hereditary. That's 90 in case I wasn't clear.
Right.
Which means they're environmental and lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people I say that to are surprised to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
They think this is something we're born with. And in some cases, we are in a small percentage. Or we're born with genes that can increase the odds of getting a certain cancer. But most of this is environmental and lifestyle. And to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's such an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's such an opportunity. Like, so what I'm eating or what I'm not eating could have caused my cancer. Oh, well, maybe I should change
Right.
what I'm eating and not eating.
Right. Yes. Yes. And what I think is inadequately studied, unfortunately, because we don't have the systems right now to actually do it, would be, people that have done what you've done, Chris. Like anecdotally, we know of tons of people. Of course, that's not a very sciencey term, tons of people, right? But we know that people do things differently than the standard of care, and they do well. Okay.
Yes.
Yes. And, it's a deficiency within the healthcare system that we're not able to study that effectively. Because, right, you enter into the space, the halls of medicine, and you're going to be told things as if they are like pristine fact. Like you do this and you have an X% chance of X% survival, right? I mean, I'm sure you did that when you got your diagnosis. You're like, all right, stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Like
Oh,
you're
sure.
reading, yes, right, about the 5-year survival.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Close to 90% do not make it to year 5.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, just to piggyback on something you said, I've talked to pancreatic cancer researchers in the Western medicine field. I've gotten to know them over the years, some of them. And they have no idea why people make it past 5 years. They will readily admit that.
Yes.
They don't study it. It's
Right.
just not on their radar.
Right. And and I think that there are communities of providers that are very interested in this. The Integrative Oncology Working Group is a group of seasoned academic and private practice clinicians that are very eager to start looking at this. And I think that we lack funding and know-how, to do these things, which actually in primary care have been part of the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, the RQ, has been, I mean, since I trained 20 years ago, there are these things called practice-based research networks that are funded by the federal government. And the question would be, because the, kind of the interventions, especially in the integrative world, are like squishy and not, necessarily going to be driving revenues, within healthcare. Is there an appetite for this?
Yeah, that's always a touchy subject, and I hope at some point we'll talk more about that, about the driving
Yeah.
revenues. But yeah, I see it with the pancreatic cancer organizations, and I assume it's with other cancer organizations. They're much more focused on finding the next drug
Hmm.
for treatment. They're focused on early detection,
Hmm.
and both of those are worthy goals,
Yeah.
but they're not focused on prevention at all. At
Right.
all. They don't even bring it up.
Hmm.
And they're not focused on dealing with the terrain, dealing with the lifestyle,
Hmm.
dealing with the environmental, the things we just talked about
Right.
that will help, I think, that will tremendously help increase the odds of not
Mm.
just surviving, but thriving
Right.
after a cancer diagnosis.
Yeah. And, just as you speak, Chris, what I'm sensing is the opportunity um, for people, not just patients with cancer, but basically all of us, to cultivate our sense of agency.
Mm,
I mean, it's not lost on me that healthcare is 20% of our GDP, right? Uh, and forces that, kind of like look at this are really just interested in that stability factor of it being such a large part of our economy, but no one wants to be part of that economy as a sick individual, right? Like we don't want to have to get sick in order to have a stable economy. Um, and so, I was sharing with you earlier just this idea that like in the 70s, with the midwifery movement in the US, women became a lot more empowered in the birth room, you know, to having an open experience. They became empowered and they weren't immediately trusted. They asserted their right to have a birth experience that was not clouded by drugs. So I was the product of a birth where my mom was given a drug that was an anamnestic. It wasn't that it kept her from feeling pain. In fact, she felt every bit of it. She just doesn't remember. She doesn't
mm.
remember me being born. And we've long metabolized the sadness and the grief that she had around that. Um, Women go into hospitals with birth plans. They have an idea that they have agency. Um, and so what would it look like? And I think that your book has helped to kind of help patients understand what they are entitled to, that sense of agency.
Think about when we were young, probably even before we were born. It's sort of been drummed into us that we are to listen to our doctors.
Yes.
They're on a pedestal. They know more.
Hmm.
And I will be fair. I think in some cases they do know more,
Hmm.
but they don't know more about my body.
Right.
They don't know more about how I'm feeling, how I'm doing, what my intuition says.
Hmm.
And they come at things, I think Western medicine has evolved into a one size fits all, or
Hmm.
for cancer, maybe it's three sizes, whether it's radiation, surgery, or chemotherapy. Now add immunotherapy to that, and there's some
Hmm.
things, other treatments that I don't even know about, but basically it's the three or four, and we're all different.
Yeah.
We are all different. Every one of us. That's why I tell patients that I work with. They always ask me, "What did you do?" And I tell them, and then I
Yes.
tell them, "I don't know if what I did will work for you
Right.
because I don't know."
Right. Well, and frankly, Chris, there's no difference between what you're saying to patients and what an oncologist should say to patients. This is
Mm.
what we can do. We don't know if it will work for you, you know? Um, I mean, just rolling that out of my mouth, like that would feel hard as a patient to hear. And yet and yet it's true. But what I think that that can do is it can help to set expectations and frankly to unburden the tools, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I think that uh chemotherapy and radiation therapy and immunotherapy and surgery are great tools, but
Hmm.
they're not necessarily adequate to achieving well-being. We did talk, in our first conversation about how our approach, like what we were trained in, fundamentally is about getting healthy. And as you get healthy, your cancer can't thrive, but you do.
Yeah. I mean, it's, if you want to farm, right? If you want to put fertilizer, pesticides, insecticides in the soil, you're going to get rid of some nasty stuff, right?
Yep.
But you're creating nasty stuff.
Right.
You're not treating the soil in a healthy
Right.
way, so
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
will thrive. And same thing with the body, right? Same thing.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, regenerative agriculture, is about that long game, right? That long game. And I think that people with cancer, whether they understand it explicitly, they're in it for the long game, right? We don't care about living 2 more months. Hold on. Oh, no, that was fun to watch. Yeah, I mean, people are not interested in another 2 months of life, right? Especially if it comes at that high cost of 2 miserable months, right? It's like we want to make it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's what I said in the previous conversation. The goal isn't just to survive. The
Right.
goal is to thrive.
Yes. Yes. Well, so
Let's up the
yeah,
bar.
right, right. So what else is on your list?
Number three, I don't know if we'll get through all 10 of these in this
Yeah.
episode, but number three, you have the right to do your own research.
Mm,
You use the internet wisely to research whatever it is you're being diagnosed with. Remember to use a filter.
hmm.
Who is writing what you're reading and why? Are they being paid? If so, by whom?
Yes.
Remember to use critical thinking skills to help you decide if a claim or assertion is true or false, or sometimes true and sometimes false,
Hmm.
or partly true and partly false.
Right.
The internet is filled with misinformation. Doctors and medical professionals can also be dispensing misinformation.
Hmm. Yeah. I probably said it, I say it all the time. The doubling time on the medical literature, doubling time every 75 days.
So explain what that means.
Yeah. So basically, the body of information that we have, like if it's this much, in 75 days, it's going to be twice that.
Mm,
Okay.
wow.
And when I was in medical school in 1995, the doubling time on the medical literature was every 25 years. So we're rapidly increasing what's out there, but there's a difference between what's out there and what's true or valid or
Hmm.
relevant. Okay.
Hmm.
And so it is true that you have to sift through more. And this is where I can get very woo-woo, with people. But what I can tell you with the experience I had with my husband and his stage 3 rectal cancer was that I felt like we were empowered with the right eyes to sift through the medical literature. Sometimes we were hunting for something specific. Sometimes we were foraging, just going through things and kind of seeing what comes up, right?
Mm.
And this, and we were looking with different energy than the clinical oncologist expert, that was taking care of him was looking, right? We have a big motivation, a big drive. We were capable of consuming more information, so sorting it, sifting it, and determining relevance. And that had a tremendous impact on our ability to say what we wanted, what sounded good. Like Eric's inner healer said, I don't want to have total mesorectal excision as a part of my cancer care, even though it is in the US considered standard of care. And he found literature to support his position that gave him a sense of agency. great.
Yeah, I think that is great. I love
Yeah.
that. Um,
Well, and you mentioned critical thinking skills, and I would say, I mean, I did, extensive training in appraising the medical literature, and it's not easy. It's not easy to detect bias. A lot of the things that we recommend or kind of feel intuitively might be helpful are not going to be studied in a way that is a randomized controlled clinical trial. Um, a lot of it might be preclinical, as in like animal research or petri dish based research. Um, and in that you would weigh the risks, like the risk of harm, you know, versus benefit. And I typically finally give the patient the final say, like, what does your inner healer say about this?
yes. Yeah, we need to devote a whole episode about just our intuition, listening to our
Yes.
gut.
Yes.
Does this feel right? Does this sound right? If something it doesn't sound right and I feel that in my body, do I act on it? Should I talk about it? Should I ask questions about it?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, I think at the end of the day, those are um the gold in the clinical setting. Because if you can articulate those curiosities, um, I think they're trailheads that lead us down, as a team, that lead us down the road to the things that will yield the most. Your inner healer going, I'm suspicious of this particular aspect of my structure, my matrix. Could be environmental, could be relational, could be nutritional, could be movement. And part of my job as a clinician is maybe to help coax you out of some part of you that wants to hold back, or like a common
Mm,
line that I say is like, we're not here for me. And I want to make sure that you feel safe telling me whatever it is that's on your mind, knowing that, you can't shock me. And, and I do my inner work to limit judgment, right? Um,
let me ask you, I'm guessing part of what you do, your appointments are what, an hour long?
yeah, initial appointments are an hour, follow-ups are a half hour. And there's, of course, like variations on all that,
Hmm.
depending.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Where I'm going with all this is that in our Western medicine medical system now, most doctors are lucky if they can spend more than 15 minutes
right.
with a patient.
Hmm.
And it's just not enough time. You're giving them enough time. Maybe not enough, but you're certainly giving them more than most doctors would.
Yeah. Well, we meet more frequently, and
Mhm.
and of course, I'm just going to say it. I mean, I wish that what I did didn't require payment, you know.
Right.
Like I mean, it's a whole other conversation. And I'm constantly trying to solve that riddle, right? Of what works, what doesn't. I have a really wonderful client that I work with right now that I see every 2 weeks. And, you know, we just agree that, I'm not going to charge her, for most of those visits. Um, she is someone that is not partnered and has cancer. So she doesn't have that supportive other. And I, just realize the need. And, every now and again, although I run a business and have rent to pay and that sort of thing, I get the right to be altruistic and to choose where I can lean in. And what I've learned about that kind of interaction with her is, we just had a conversation about this not too long ago, that every visit is no longer burdened with that, like, oh my God, I got to talk about I got to get all these
Mm.
things out, right? Because it's like, hey, let's save that for next time. I'll see you in 2 weeks. And
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
it's it's very powerful. It's just as um unburdening for me as I'm sure it is for her. Um, because it's complicated what we do, you know, really complicated.
It is complicated. And I know you're good at this. So not to speak for the universe of patients, but we want to be heard.
Mm,
We really do. We want to be
mm,
heard. We want to be able to ask questions.
yeah.
We want to be able to make eye contact. We want to be able to know you're going to be in there more than 15 minutes. So we're not left with, wait, what about?
Right.
Um,
Right. Um,
just the human connection is so important.
exactly. And what you're alluding to is something that it's a real kind of like a psychic hurdle um for me as a clinician. I've never actually had conversations with other healthcare providers about this. At some point in the last couple of years, I was challenged with the idea of being a healer. Okay.
Mm,
Now that word uh felt at the time like the opposite of a scientist. Okay. It felt like it belonged more in the religious, or spiritual domain. And yet I kept reading and learning about power in the in the roles that we play as clinician and patient. Okay. And we can ascribe that, if anybody wants to read more about this, this is the entire body of work by Cedar Barstow, who's a psychologist. And we don't get trained enough in it in healthcare, but it's already present. Cedar Barstow has just kind of outlined what's already going on, right? And so providers, clinicians have this up power over patients. Patients are just like, kind of at the mercy, right? You could think
yep,
about this, right? And the same thing exists between parents and children, between religious leaders and their congregations.
yep.
And, um, and so we have to acknowledge those roles. And so for me to kind of have this role of clinician, it was helpful for me to say, I'm also going to embrace that I'm healing. I'm I'm not God. There's nothing magical about me, but when I step into that role as a clinician, I would like to augment that capacity by fully embracing a very scary word, which is healing,
Mm.
you know?
What you're doing is teaching your patients how to heal, right?
I think so. I think it's,
Yeah.
a word that comes to mind in this space is confidence. I'm not confidently saying I know what's going to happen. I'm confidently saying I'm listening. And, you know, we then become this reflection of one another. Patient says something and I go, that, right? That sounds that that's what's coming up for me. Does that sound right? They go, and they do the same thing, right? And in that way, the relevance of our interaction becomes greater, more useful. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what I also hear you saying is how individual it all is, right? I mean,
Hmm.
if you have 10 patients coming in, I know that's a lot, let's say five patients a day,
Mm.
every one of them, you might be advising them to do different things, different modalities,
Oh
different
yeah.
supplements. I mean,
Right.
there's no one way.
Right. And, you know, this is in opposition to the one size fits all kind of attitudes that I mean, frankly, is only available if you only have a limited amount of time, you know? So, that time is that squishy variable that we don't have enough of.
Yeah. I'm just thinking back to when I got diagnosed, the first oncologist who put me on chemo, it didn't work. And then he upped the chemo and it still didn't work. I was miserable. If I kept on that path, I would have died.
Yeah.
I would have died. He knew what he knew. He's had some success. I
Hmm.
put that in air quotes, some success, but success for that oncologist is a few months. It's what we talked about earlier. It's a few
Yeah.
months, not a few years. It's not 20 years. It's not
Right.
30 years. Um, yeah, yeah, yeah. Should we try
Let's do a
doing one
couple
more?
more. Yeah, let's
Couple
do
more?
that.
Okay. Okay. Number four, doctors aren't gods. We've kind of been talking about this.
We've been
They,
talking about that.
they don't know everything. You have the right to find a doctor who admits they may not know something.
Mhm.
Honesty and integrity go a long way.
Yeah, I love that. You know, I think it's been a couple of conversations that I've had with you, Chris, that have m allowed me to kind of like step into that space more authentically, you know, to, I mean, I mean, we get enculturated pretty hard in medicine to be experts, right? And so for me to admit that I don't know something, you know, 10 years ago would have been really hard. I would have just kind of like ignored. And I'm growing up. I'm getting more wise in this space. And I think that, you know, a feature of a productive encounter could include something you've already said before, which is if my toolkit is tapped out, that I acknowledge that my toolkit's tapped out and doesn't mean there's something wrong with you or me. So we've reached the limit of what I can offer, and I want
Mhm.
to encourage you to go on. There's this like really unfortunate attitude mindset where, and I think that the kind of the nuts and bolts of it go like this, like don't encourage people in a way that is, you know, like somebody dying. Don't encourage them to have hope when they shouldn't. Does that make sense? Have you heard that
Yeah,
before? Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking about that, but yeah.
right. And there's just so many ways that that's wrong to me. And I don't want to disempower good information. That's not what I'm saying. You know, what I'm saying is that at any like like that health and hope, you know, and healing can happen at any stage in any duration of lifespan, you know?
Yes, it's never too late.
Right.
It is
So,
never too late.
right. Because I think that just to say like we're done here, you know, and let's move, you know, let's move you into palliative care and I'm kind of done. I'm going to shift you over. And I, we've got a lot of work to do on what that looks like, how that feels for people. And um yeah, and probably should just devote an entire episode to that, you know.
So I want to ask you a question about doctors not being gods and medical school. I don't know the actual number, so I'm spitballing here.
Hmm.
But I know Dr. Casey Means, who wrote the book Good Energy, says something like up to 80% of doctors are not trained on nutrition in medical school.
Yeah,
Is that true?
I got one lecture,
Wow.
one lecture. Um, you know, and again, I would say fundamentally it's not maybe because healthcare isn't interested. It's that there's no research. There nobody is you know, making that much money off of carrots to put carrots in the driver's seat on like funding research about carrot consumption and health, right?
Right.
And the other really, this is interesting. This comes from people like Mary Hardy and some of the Canadian researchers that have worked in nutritional deficiencies and neurodevelopmental disorders. This is mind blowing. Out of, you know, it was like some crazy number, like 40,000 acres of Canadian soil that were surveyed for micronutrient sufficiency, you know, like a bare minimum of the micronutrients, you know, required to produce healthy food. Do you know how many of the 40,000 acres had all the micronutrients at a bare minimum?
I'm going to guess not very many, but go ahead.
Zero.
Yeah.
Okay. So, you know, in this research, what was clear was that our governmental, you know, support for information like this, um, was not willing to fund research that looked at micronutrient supply in its totality. They were willing to fund a research on like one vitamin. But that's not how we work as people, right? We're not like, it's not like one vitamin that we need. We typically, if we're nutritionally depleted, we have a broad range of nutritional deficiencies. So that's just examples from the field that I can think of. But yes, like we're not trained in nutrition.
Are you
Yes.
trained? Are you trained? I have another question. Are you trained under the umbrella of the treatment model as opposed to the prevention and the cure model?
Generally, yes, right? We're trained, it's a very disease-oriented approach.
Mm.
Hypothyroid, you give thyroid medicine. Diabetes, you give diabetes medicine. And in all of the guidelines, so obviously hypothyroidism, it's like there are, well, it's funny, I'm like editing as I say this, like Hashimoto's is the most common reason that people have hypothyroidism. It's an autoimmune disease of the thyroid gland. And in general, in, kind of therapeutic advice about hypothyroidism, it's just like, take your medicine, right? And anybody with Hashimoto's knows that what they eat, how they move, how they sleep, the whole laundry list has a tremendous impact on disease activity and on well-being. But if you're trying to parse out like that 7 minutes that you have with a patient, like, are you going to talk about that? And I would say, like, with compassion to my fellow colleagues, it's like, if you don't have time, you're not going to open that ball of wax, because what's going to happen, you're going to open your mouth, you're going to say 5 things, and the patient's going to be like, but I have more questions. And you'd be like, see ya, I got 3 people waiting, like that gall that rises. I mean, I've been there. It's like, where, oh my God, I'm an hour behind, you know, walk in the room, people are angry already, I
Mm.
hate that. Yeah.
We may want to dive into this more in another episode, but my question to you now, if you want to answer it is, how wedded to standard of care are doctors?
Mm.
And maybe could you let our listeners know what standard of care actually even means?
Oh yeah. Right. So let's start with the first one. How wedded are doctors to standard of care? I think this goes back to I mean, working in healthcare fundamentally require, like, I'm a medical doctor, an MD. So um I take an oath, right? First, do no harm. Second, only apply the treatments that are reasonable and indicated. Okay. And there, I think there's a lot of like bandwidth to, parse that. But in the mid 90s, there was this idea that evidence should underscore the rationale for treatment. Like we don't just like make it up as we go, but that we, you know, practice the art of medicine, which, I think softly means you can kind of combine your clinical experience, and then you have plausible biologic rationale for what you're doing and why. So, um, in the healthcare setting, we get trained in a certain way, and we're going to practice along, kind of acceptable practice patterns. Okay. And frankly, those can actually vary by geography. A landmark study in the practice of cardiology was that, I can't remember, it was somewhere in the Northeast, like in Vermont or Maine. If you were on one side of the mountain, you know, the cardiologists there tended to put stents in everybody that presented
Mm.
to the emergency department with chest pain. If you were on the other side of the mountain, the cardiologists there tended to treat with medicines, not interventions. Now, the reason for that was that, frankly, it was financially incentivized. These guys that put stents in made more money if they put the stents in, and these guys on the
Wow.
side, made more. And that's not to say that either of those approaches was necessarily wrong, but what was being kind of shown was that the practice pattern was, and the cardiologists themselves very authentically did not feel like the financial incentive influenced their practice pattern, which is interesting,
Mm.
right? But I mean, below the level of conscious awareness, we are typically going to choose the things that incentivize us, our own sense of thriving and, well-being, right? I don't say any of that like on those evil cardiologists. It's more like, we often are not aware of the forces at play in our life. So kind of looping back, like how wedded are doctors to standard of care? Well, that also then becomes a question about like medico-legal safety.
Right.
Right? If I have a rationale, in a kind of like a commonly accepted risk and benefit profile to an approach, um, it is less easy, although not impossible, for me to get sued about something, right? And so I think that, all doctors, we all have like that annual insurance premium that we're paying. Um, and some of us are more risk tolerant and some are more risk averse. Um, and unfortunately, I think that really starts to maybe have an outsized influence or role in the patient encounter room, right? And so I'll give you an example of what that might be. Came up recently in one of my kind of like professional conversations, that a patient family wanted him to pursue high dose vitamin C therapy for cancer. And the the clinician that I was in conversation with just said there's no evidence that it's going to help. And and it might interfere with the successful treatment of the patient. And although we could, kind of parse the details of that, I think fundamentally it was a medical legal risk thing, that even though the high dose vitamin C would have been pursued outside of the clinical office, like the clinician was not going to prescribe it or offer it, their endorsement of it made them feel like if they were to endorse it, it would have made them feel more at risk. Okay.
So I don't want to make this about you, but just doctors in general, there's the potential for them being sued if they
Mhm.
don't follow standard of care. There's the potential for them losing their licenses
Mhm.
if there's a pattern of not following standard of care.
Mhm.
What about getting reimbursed by insurance companies if a doctor isn't following standard of care? Will insurance companies say, no, I'm not going to cover that?
Well, so if we're seeking insurance coverage for a treatment that's considered quote unquote off label, if the patient is seeking reimbursement for that by their drug company, that would go through a process called prior approval or a PA, right? And so in general, those things aren't covered.
Mm,
Um, and you're just unpacking kind of the whole problem of insurance. So insurance
yeah,
is, I mean, it's a problem because it's vertically integrated, it's publicly traded, right? The main point of insurance is no longer to keep people well and healthy or to heal them. It's shareholder dividends, right? And we're experiencing that. Like there's this big bubble right now in traditional practice that some of the insurance carriers that integrated with drugstores and these kind of like minute clinics are not performing, they're underperforming their expected, kind of revenues. And as a result, the volume of prior authorizations that we normally do has tripled.
wow,
And so
wow.
this is how the industry kind of like throws wrenches in the machine to slow it down, to interfere with payments that are going out. Um, it's something that I can only say I can feel it. I can tell you that like, on our side, I can listen to the news, I can hear that they're closing a bunch of minute clinics and CVS and blah, blah, blah. And our volume of PAs has tripled. And as a result, I know people are like, they're going to go a few weeks without their meds because the process takes time, you know?
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
It's a broken system.
Yeah, well, it really speaks to the fact that there's a whole lot of elephants in the room that are not visible, you know? Um, so that stuff, the prior authorization thing, and yet we live in this cyber world. So, sometimes I mean, I just have to kind of like break down a little bit and confess with patients. I'm like, my nurse just spent an hour on the phone trying to get your prior authorization done. An hour in an 8-hour day, like where we've got a lot of stuff going on, and and people think, oh, just get that PA done. Like, and they think that it's something that's like automatic or easy for us. And it's like, it's actually, I hate giving people that job here because it's so demoralizing. Like just for your kind of day job, you're sitting on the phone like with someone whose every mission and purpose is to not authorize this drug and yours is to authorize it. Like, yes.
So I just want to be clear. So it is more financially difficult for patients and for doctors if standard of care is not followed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Right. And I think too, again, standard of care, does that mean best and highest patient outcomes? Not necessarily,
right.
right? Um, and who determines best and highest patient outcome? What the definition of that? Is it number of days on the planet? Is it quality of life? Is it individualized? These things are basically, it's too complex for the system to, you know, fully embrace.
Yeah, I think that's why many of us, and I know you're probably there as well, want a new standard of care. I'm not sure that
Yes.
I'm not sure the existing one is fixable.
Right. Yes. There's some part of me that longs for a phoenix to rise from the ashes.
Mm,
Um, and it's not to say that I want to throw out all of the things, right? I
correct.
mean, I love I love my training in Western medicine. I love, all that it has led me to understand in the way that I can understand it. And I also know that what I understand is not necessarily the truth, you know.
The way I would say it would be from a patient's perspective. When I stepped on a stingray at Santa Monica Beach 2 years ago and my foot got infected, I went to the emergency room. I got Western medicine care and it was fantastic. Truly, it
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
Gave me some antibiotics, stitched up my foot. I mean, yes,
Hmm.
if I got in a car accident, I want to go to an emergency room. If I
Yeah.
break a bone, I mean, I've had back surgery, I've had shoulder surgery, I've had stuff with my eyes. There's some amazing, amazing stuff with Western medicine.
Hmm.
What I get concerned about, I'm just giving my opinion, I'm not speaking for you, is the chronic illness side.
Yes.
I'm more suspicious of that.
Well, I would say, frankly, Chris, our ability to understand chronic illness is very limited. Okay. So we have these like kind of theories, that we try to work within the framework of, but the theories don't integrate things like environmental exposures right now. We know that the 80,000 chemicals generally recognized as safe and never studied in humans do have a huge impact on our health. We know that the built environment, it's kind of like the medical terminology for your zip code, has a greater impact on your mortality than any lifestyle choice you make,
Mm.
right? And yet we put it all on the person, right? We're like, you need to eat less and move more. That's kind of the general lifestyle recommendation, in healthcare. And it's patients have tried and it hasn't worked for them. And so they're like, forget it, you know? And then simultaneously, people are being kind of like horrifically manipulated and marketed in the food landscape, you know, with hyper palatable foods and things that are terrible for them that just drive, kind of like those revenues and kind of commodity markets. And so it's like, you're up against a lot as a patient, as a person on this earth, up against a lot.
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Maybe on that cheery note, we should pick up number 5 on the next episode. I think we've been at this almost an hour.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I certainly would love to kind of finish the conversation today,
Mm.
with maybe a little bit of a recap just to kind of reaffirm like the power, right? And the opportunity that patients have kind of coming into this experience of cancering, which could easily be applied to the experience of autoimmuning or the
Sure.
experience of parenting and trying to provide good health care for your children or cardiovascular healthing. It's all relevant, probably, just in prevention and chronic disease management when interacting with the Western medical model. So, number one, you have the right to have somebody with you or record.
Hmm.
Yeah. What's number two?
Number 2 is you have the right to a second opinion, a third opinion.
Yes.
You have the right to talk to other practitioners.
Yes. Yep. And then the third point,
You have the right to do your own research.
yes,
Use it using a filter.
right. And the fourth point that you made was about seeking people that don't necessarily practice standard of care medicine.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote it in a much more crude way. You were much more articulate, so thank you. I
Mm.
appreciate that. The way I wrote it in the book was the doctors aren't gods, and I was referring
Yeah.
to the Western medicine practice. But by the way, there's some people are people, right?
Yeah.
There's some good people in the Western medicine field. There's some good people in the alternative world,
Right.
and there's some less than good people in both worlds.
Right. Well, I think fundamentally, like, I believe in the goodness of people, right? The
I
goodness of
love that.
humanity. Yep. And, we can, just frankly, Western medical people can operate with a little bit too much hubris, right? A little too much pride and um, kind of insistence that we know what is correct. And if we're to take in kind of the ineffable, kind of beyond our understanding, kind of like wisdom of the human body, um, we in Western medicine would do well to just kind of unburden ourselves from the idea that we are correct. Because at any moment, we know that our understanding of things is super limited. You know, it's so limited. And
Yeah.
I refuse, I mean, I've grown up enough to know that I in no way do I want to remove wonder or enchantment from the healing space, you know?
And I'm sure it motivates you, right? I mean, you know more now than you did 10 years ago, than you knew
Mm.
20 years ago.
Mhm.
And I'm guessing 10 years from now, you'll know more than you do today. And that's amazing, right? That's
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's also about, it's kind of like in knowing, I know how little I know.
mm,
And so it gives me more confidence to say, hey, I don't know. And I'm willing to read and try to understand. And, and I would hope that people are like, my role with people is maybe that I bring that critical thinking kind of rationale or capacity to the table. I can give you a good example. I've got a patient with pancreatic cancer right now, and he and his partner are looking at some options, and and they've read about DON, which is it's an anti-amino acid that basically
mm.
interferes with glutamine metabolism. And in preclinical trials, it's really amazing, and it's like a hot item in the medical literature. And it's also true that it's exquisitely toxic. And in the clinical trials, it's just like hasn't been worked out yet because it is so toxic. But a not terrible like alternative to that is methionine restriction. Yeah. And so we've been talking about methionine restriction in the diet, um and again, it's this good interpersonal interaction where, I can bring to they're reading about Don as like the magic bullet for pancreatic cancer. And I'm able to say like, I don't think we're there yet, you
Mm,
know? And this is stuff from Thomas Seyfried, and they're doing great things, and we're going to get there with that particular substance, you know? Um, and it's painful, to say like, it's not available like yet,
mm.
you know?
But I love that you're giving alternatives.
Well, right. And methionine
Yeah.
restriction is easy. That's like eat fruit for 2 weeks,
Hmm.
but then back that off because you can't do methionine restriction forever. Um,
Right, right, right.
yes, yes.
Maybe the way to end this is one of the reasons I enjoy talking with you is you're so hopeful. And I
Mm,
think we need that. We really need that. So thank you.
yes. Well, thank you. Um, I can imagine taking a hopeful attitude all the way to my deathbed.
Mm,
And um, and frankly, through my work with psychedelics, have totally unburdened around fear of dying, you know, as in that's not the worst thing that can happen. Not having insight is my greater fear.
mm. That's another episode we're going to have to do on psychedelics.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Right. And, I will happily plug the opportunity for the reduction of fear, to be such a potent healing tool, right?
Mm, yeah, yeah, yeah.
What, yeah, whether that's in the ordinary consciousness or non-ordinary consciousness.
Yeah, I like that too. Thank you, Amy. This has been great.
Oh yeah, Chris, it's always good. So until next time.
Until next time.
All right. Bye.